let's take you back to the football now, because I mentioned the VAR controversy of this week, Cass. It's under the spotlight once again. This after Harry Kane's disallowed goal, which it looked as though at one stage that Tottenham were going to beat Sporting Lisbon very late on through that goal from Harry Kane, but it was ruled out in the end due to the offside rule. So really what we should say is, factually, it's all right. It's all done by the letter of the law. It's absolutely right. The VAR decision that was come to, or that was made in the end. I think what it's highlighted, Cass, actually, is the unknown that many people have when it comes to the laws of the game, because so many people were disputing on the night and even since, why was it disallowed? And surely what was it? I've got to find the name of the player now that I've said this.
Emerson.
No, I was thinking of the Sporting Nazinho. The fact that it comes off him and is deflected off into the path of Harry Kane. Yeah. Surely he's part of the reset when it comes to offside. But because it's a deflection and not a deliberate action of play, that's why it's not a reset, because he hasn't deliberately intended to play the ball.
Can I just say something, because it's important? Didn't we have a conversation last week about not knowing the laws? Not us, but generally
in
football.
In general,
football,
I
not knowing the laws.
I think so, and I think that, this is what's been highlighted. And listen, offside or any law, you talk about the handball. The problem is the rules change all the time, so you really do either have to freshen up, or you're scouring at the time to look what the latest law is, just to understand the handball law, for example, which has changed a few times. The offside situation hasn't obviously changed, but it did mean there were a lot of people talking about, the ball being played backwards. Surely that plays on Harry Kane, for example. But again, that's irrelevant. There's no such law that talks about the direction of the ball. But this is the problem we find. We all think we're referees, actually, and we're not. We haven't a clue.
Isn't it common, though, of modern life, how everything's so complicated?
I know.
Accreditation to Qatar.
Yeah, that's been fun.
You know what? No, what I mean, everything's so complicated, and I've said this because we've had this conversation now about from 2016 how laws have changed on a regular basis, and so many of them, and it's hard to keep up. It's like keeping up with the school when your kids you're getting emails about everything. And, you just can't keep up with modern day life, and football's just followed down the same narrative that is always change. Some is so much murky, rules that have been implied, and I'm not even sure after the referees. We've seen referees make mistakes on the laws of the game that they've studied for. Now, footballers you can slightly excuse, but there has been decision now. I've seen decisions where two referees have disagreed on the same on the outcome. They've disagreed on it.
That's coming down to subjectivity, isn't it?
No, it's also coming down to the law isn't really consistent.
Well, I know we spoke about this very briefly last week about Douglas Luiz when his red card was rescinded when he was sent off for Aston Villa. And I remember saying to you about at the time, thinking, well, fair enough. The commission thought it was it was unfair that he shouldn't have been dismissed when he was for that supposed headbutt, shall we say, on Alexander Mitrovic. But the fact that two referees, because it was the VAR that alerted Michael Oliver to go and look at the screen. Yeah. So the VAR has thought, well, that's a red card he'd missed. Michael Oliver goes over. He thinks there's a red card. So that's two referees thinks it's a red card. But the commission are the ones that decide, you both got that wrong. Yeah. I find that bizarre in itself, because you've completely re-refereed the game and you've completely dismissed and overruled two referees who thought it was a red card.
Yeah, you're spot on.
But yeah, I think that is part of the issue we find ourselves in with the subjectivity, which doesn't relate to offside because that's factual. Yeah. And there's a guy on Twitter who I do recommend people follow because he really explains things. Dale Johnson, who is from ESPN, actually brilliantly describes everything. Any incidents in matches is really worth following because he really does explain it all. Goes into a lot of detail into that particular Harry Kane goal as to why it was disallowed and as to why it took so long for the decision to be made as well. Because what it all came down to the angles of the camera, for example. So the goal line camera looked to show maybe Kane was onside, but they really needed to visualise where the ball was in relation to Kane. And that meant they had to bring in the Hawkeye camera situation, or the system, I should say, And that's why it took 3 minutes and 30 seconds for the offside call to be made, because it takes so long for that technology to work and visualise and confirm where the ball is. Because obviously that plays into the offside rule, where the ball is in position to Harry Kane. So the direction of going backwards is completely irrelevant. Doesn't come into consideration in this at all. It's all down to the position of the striker relative to either the second last opposition player and, if necessarily, the ball. So that's partly why that took so long. Then you bring in Nazinho's part in this. As I mentioned already, it's not a deliberate play of action, therefore it doesn't reset offside, which a lot of people are debating whether that's the case, because if he's a defender and he's trying to
Are you doing anything
block
this afternoon, Nat? You'll be really good at this VAR.
I'll tell you what, though, it is very lengthy to kind of get through.
Do we need football forensic science? Do we? CSI. No, do you know what? Honestly, it feels to me that I understand it, and you've explained it all brilliantly, and the guy's spot on, and the law is correct, that what's happened, the final outcome is the right one. I get all of that. But do we need football forensic science in the game? That is the question I would want to ask.
You probably need someone who really knows the laws inside out. And that sounds stupid to say it, because effectively a lot of us should know it already. But you probably do need, in those circumstances, to be crossing to a referee that really does know the laws, or certainly knows them enough to understand the decision that's come to, rather than maybe speculating and the subjectivity thing comes into it. That offside decision, for example, I'm sure would have taken a long time to explain during the game, but it's unless you have all the details to hand. I mean, let's not forget, you also have to search for it on the IFAB law book, and it takes a while to find these things on IFAB, because I've even got the app, and I find it hard to find things on there. But someone like that, Dale Johnson, is brilliant. So if you don't follow him already on Twitter, I would advise it, because he's brilliant and explains it really, really well. And I know talkSPORT have used him many times. He's on H&J.
You've done that. You've explained it very well, Nat. And the game ended 1-1, by the way.
I don't know if I have. But anyway, there's lots of controversy as usual. But in this instance, VAR did get it right. It just took so long because they had to bring other technology into it that took a little bit of time to get it going.